So I just finished my 13th book, and this was the first book that I used AI to help me with. Now, I didn't use AI for ideation or the beginning of the book. What I did is I used AI as a late-stage developmental editor. I wrote the first 3 drafts of the book without it, and then I used individual prompts, late stage, to supercharge this book. I could not believe how much better it made this manuscript. I want to tell you just a few ways and a few of the prompts that I used to really supercharge this thing. I'm writing a self-help book. The goal is to turn it into a New York Times bestseller and perennial bestseller. Below are the chapter titles. I would like you to give them a ranking based off of the flip test. Would you turn to that chapter based solely on the chapter title? Your ranking can be letter grades like a test in school, A, B, C, D, and F. What ideas were particularly interesting that might be underdeveloped? What stories do you need more info on? What transitions were unclear? What are the weakest parts of my argument? What are the most boring parts? What are the parts that I should double down on? Here's the entire manuscript. Can you please summarize it in 1 sentence, 1 paragraph, and 1 page for me? Are there places where I'm being too abstract, where there could be more concrete examples? I went through my entire manuscript chapter by chapter with every single one of these questions, one at a time. This was a good one. How does it compare to other perennial bestsellers in the genre? What makes it uniquely valuable? I was talking to my literary agent about AI a little while ago, and I sent her this text message. I'll read it to you. I said, think basically having God with immediate access to all knowledge of human history and the ability to distill that knowledge within seconds, willing to be your debate partner 24/7 and hold no grudges. I think AI for creative people is so wonderfully underutilized still. It's not something that replaces you, it supercharges your abilities. It's made me such a deeper thinker because what I can do is I can load into it a hard take, for example, and I can say, debate me. And it'll challenge me and it'll ask me questions. And I'll go back and forth with this thing and give it shit and try to prove myself. And it forces me to prove myself or see things in a different light. And then I can say, cool, can you summarize our conversation? What I also love about it though is that I can put my writing through AI. Like I put my manuscript for my next book through Claude, 60,000 word manuscript. And I said, I'd like you to point out the logical inconsistencies. Where are people going to be able to challenge my arguments? Needle in a haystack type stuff, right? And look, in some cases I made some changes based off of what it pointed out. In other cases I didn't. That's where the taste comes in. When you work with AI, what it comes down to is taste. You're delegating the information to them and encouraging the AI platform to use a tremendous amount of processing power. I mean, I've worked with a lot of editors for long manuscripts before, and in order for an editor to do a full edit of the book takes a lot of time. Not only does it take a lot of time for them, but in order for them to get back to me, it'll take a few weeks. And so by the time that I get edits back from them, I've forgotten what I was trying to say. It takes me so much time to get into that mindset of the story and whatever. With AI, I can go back and forth with it on something immediately, like big batches of text, and immediately and stay in the headspace. So even if it's not, quite as good of an editor, it's useful. But here's the rub, though. Because of the processing power, I've now changed my editing process to actually do individual edits of the manuscript based off of single questions at a time. You could never do this with a human. It just simply takes too long. But I'll do an edit for humor, for example, in my books. And I'll go through and I'll upload each chapter at a time and I'll say, I want to add some humor. And I'll give it a gauge of what I believe is humor and good jokes and things like that. And then I'll add it in and I'll work with them and then I'll, work my way through the chapters. I'll say, what are the most boring elements of this chapter? What's the most boring element of this book? And literally, I kid you not, in the middle of I gave the entire manuscript to the book and I said, tell me what the most boring part of this book is. And it said, in one section, in the middle of chapter 4, you use redundant examples. I go back to that chapter and I say, holy shit, I did. And so I decided which example to keep and which example I did not need anymore. And I said, okay, AI, can you please rewrite this section with the redundant example, this one that I chose to, removed? It rewrites the entire section now with that one removed. Keeps all of my writing, and then I go through and do an edit. That would have taken me 3 days, normally. The other example I'll give is AI is wonderful at exposing me to my blind spots. I've educated it to who I am. I come from a middle to upper class white Jewish family in Canada. I'm a man. I've been in the gym basically every week since I was 15. I've never known really what like not being healthy was. I've had good habits instilled upon me from my parents' health habits. There's a lot of blind spots that I have when I'm trying to write books that might be consumed by people of the opposite sex, people who are from different parts of the country, socioeconomic statuses, whatever. And so what I'm able to put my book or chapters of my book through, or passages or frameworks through, and the system knows who I am, and I say, expose me to my blind spots. Who can challenge me on this based off of who I'm not and who I don't understand? And it will do that. And then I'll say, can you make some suggestions of how I might be able to account for that, or perhaps be gracious towards those people? And I say, well, it'd be really, really nice if you could have a story, in this capacity. And what that does then to me is that makes me think about somebody that I've met through my walk of life that fits that mold. And you almost always can. And then what I'll say is, great, what I'm going to do now, and this is the prompt that I give to AI, I say, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to provide you with a ton of source material. Can you please take this and include it into the text for that section to solve the blind spot problem? And then what I'll do is I'll just rip everything that I can remember about that story. I don't need to worry about grammar. I don't need to worry about the most important points, about the formatting of the thing, right? I can just rip it straight from memory. I know people who voice dictate, I type, and just like blocks of text, like really messy. And I press enter, and then it rewrites that section for me with that new story incorporated, and then I can go through, and then I can edit it down, and then I can neaten it up. And I might reject what it does, of course, but the amount of work and better work that allows me to do is really quite incredible.